Welcome to our event on Affordable Housing Week. Happy Affordable Housing Week, everyone. We would like to begin this meeting by acknowledging and recognizing that we are all, wherever we are, on the unceded ancestral land of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Land acknowledgement is a traditional custom dating back centuries for many Native communities and nations. For non-Indigenous communities like many of you here today, land acknowledgement is a powerful way of showing respect and acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of this land on which we work and live. It is a simple way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories and working towards honoring and inviting the truth. Welcome to the event on updating comprehensive plans to create thriving, affordable communities. I will just start off with some grounding and context, and then we'll hand over to our amazing regional leaders who are joining us today and the agencies who would be presenting and providing you with some tools. As the Housing Development Consortium, we are rethinking and envisioning a place where people live in safe, healthy, and affordable homes. And we have an enormous opportunity as King County and as the Puget Sound region to plan for this future where people can find housing that they can afford in their communities. We adopted an ambitious plan with ambitious goals in Vision 2050 as our long-range plan. And now as cities and counties move forward with their multi-year processes for a periodic update to their comprehensive plans, it is an opportunity for us to advance housing affordability. It is an opportunity for us to look at how the housing elements can really accommodate the housing affordability goals long-term. And there's a lot of work in between that's happening before that work moves forward with the different agencies like the Department of Commerce in setting methodologies that can help inform a lot of that work. We have to lean in and get this right because it is an opportunity for us to really do it right. The comprehensive plan, as many of you know, and some of you who may be non-planners speak here, it's effectively a handbook that contains a city's goals, visions, and policies around which growth and development is really oriented. It's intended to ensure growth is inclusive, and it's inclusive of housing affordability. And we are creating this platform as a Housing Development Consortium to be sure that this opportunity is really emphasized on and built on. We want to be able to provide resources and tools for you as planners to know how to connect to the right agencies leading the work, but for you as affordable housing advocates, as affordable housing providers to also lean in and support this work of advancing this North Star around which local jurisdictions then get to pass their policies. We know that the multi-year process will complete in 2024, fingers crossed if the deadlines are met. And now is the time as that multi-year process begins for us to really be equipped in engaging in the process and making sure that when we adopt plans in 2024, that will last us to 2044. It's really committing to a future where we are affordable. We're committing to a future where people can thrive in their communities. It's a time for us to ensure that we're truly an equitable region. And we can only do that through the planning tools that we've set for ourselves. And we can do that with the commitment that I know we have. We continue to grow as a region. I was at a growth management policy board meeting just a few weeks ago, where the data trends actually show that we continue to grow. And we need to plan for that growth in the most effective ways. And we have the opportunity to do that. And we have the leadership to do that. And I would like to pivot at this point and introduce a leader who will take us on this next agenda item. But let me give you a quick overview of what we will cover in the event. We'll have Councilmember Ed Prince speak to you just briefly. And then we'll have King County Councilmember Claudia Balducci will speak after Councilmember Prince. And then we have a presentation from the Department of Commerce, and then a presentation from the Puget Sound Regional Council. And then we'll close off with a quick question and answer session. But now allow me to introduce Councilmember Ed Prince, who does so much and has been such a source of inspiration for me. And I don't know how you do it, Councilmember Ed Prince. You're truly a source of inspiration. But let me give you a bio overview of Councilmember Ed Prince, who is the current chair of the Puget Sound Regional Council's Growth Management Policy Board. Councilmember Prince is in his third term on the Renton City Council, and during his time on council has served on several regional boards and committees. He's also the executive director of the Washington State Commission on African American Affairs, the immediate past president of the Sound Cities Association, a member of the Sound Transit Board of Directors, and co-chair of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. He believes that the strength of government really comes from collaboration with our residents and community partners, and is happy to be here with us today to speak about the need for collaboration and coordination to meet our regional growth management goals. Over to you, Councilmember Prince.
Thank you so much, Patience, and happy Affordable Housing Week, and I'm so happy to be here today. So why is regional coordination important? Our communities are tackling big issues that cross jurisdictional boundaries and require coordination and collaboration to make real change for all people. I'm fond of saying to my colleagues on my council that our problems don't end at our city's borders. They blend into other cities and other communities. And so it's very important that we work together in a collaborative manner to try to solve all the issues that are going on. To help guide regional work, the region developed and adopted Vision 2050, the region's long-range plan for growth. Vision 2050 shows commitment throughout the region for how we want to work together to plan for growth into the future. Vision 2050 provides new and additional focus on several issues, including housing affordability, climate change, racial equity, coordination with tribal nations and other stakeholders, and planning for high-capacity transit. It sets the stage for work countywide coordination and local efforts such as updates to countywide planning policies and local comprehensive plans. The major periodic update to local comprehensive plans is a once-in-a-decade opportunity for local planning to engage communities, collaborate with partners, and carry out shared regional vision. Again, I'm so happy to be here today. I'm going to hand the virtual mic to my good friend and colleague, King County Council Chair Claudia Balducci, who is a mom, transportation and affordable housing leader, and a former public safety official. She's a regional leader serving as chair of the Sound Transit Board's System Expansion Committee, president of the Puget Sound Regional Council, and chair of the county's Affordable Housing Committee. Councilmember Balducci is excited to be here today to discuss incorporating affordability targets in our countywide planning policies. Take it away, Claudia.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Councilmember and my colleague. I like to say Ed, Councilmember Prince. Nice to see you. I would love to, I am so excited to be kicking off Affordable Housing Week. I love this week. We think about affordable housing at the King County Council and some of those other agencies a lot, but it's nice to have the public sort of focus with us in this week. And we are kicking off Affordable Housing Week on the topic of comprehensive planning, which is totally my alley, right up my alley, but not necessarily the thing that lends itself to a big inspirational chant, right? Like, hey, hey, ho, ho, comprehensive planning for affordability is the way to go. But it is true. It is absolutely the way to go. What we're going to talk about today is how this kind of long-range planning can really turn the corner on the affordability challenges we're having. I'd like to start out by saying some big numbers. Usually, the big number I want to share with you today is $1 million. In my neighborhood, in East Bellevue, one of the least unaffordable neighborhoods in all of East King County, the home prices are now averaging over $1 million. And we've been sort of waiting to cross that boundary for a while, and we just leapt right past it this year. I have constituents coming to me with rent increase notices that range in the hundreds of dollars per month. I had one come to me recently with a notice that said that his family's rent will be going up $600 a month. It's just, we are losing affordability at an astonishing pace here in East King County. Can I show my presentation so I can explain this a little bit? Let's see, share screen, there we go. All right, I'm going to try to make this work, you all. I'm not the greatest at this. Thank you for your patience. So here's the presentation. It's not displaying. Let's stop that. Okay. I'm going to try one more time, and if it doesn't work, I will just talk to you. I don't want to waste too much time here, but I want to try to put this up.
So we could see it. It just wasn't in the slide mode.
Oh,
but it did show up.
Can you see it now?
I cannot.
You cannot.
But before it did, so maybe when it says it's not displaying, it is.
Oh, that's very weird. All right, let's try one more time. Share. How about now?
Yes, we can see it.
And let's see if I can get it to play from the beginning. How's that?
Excellent.
Slide. So you see how you see the name, my title slide there?
You're all set.
Yes, all right. So I'm going to just go through this pretty quickly. First of all, as Councilmember Prince mentioned, I do chair something called the Affordable Housing Committee, and I think that's why I'm here today. So let me just share with you. This is an odd little secret kind of government committee. We actually are a subcommittee of something called the Growth Management Planning Council, which is a coalition of governments that works on comprehensive planning together. Our subcommittee was created in 2019 based on a task force that we spearheaded out of King County Council that came up with a list of recommendations how to improve affordability in King County. One of their recommendations was we needed a place that thought about this issue all the time. We have 18 members, half are government, half are non-government, foreign nonprofit folks involved in housing one way or another. We've recently created a community partners table, which brings a wide variety and diversity of interest to the table. BIPOC communities, LGBTQ interests, people representing seniors and others who have special housing needs to advise us on specific community needs and priorities. And our big task that we are assigned as a committee is to advise the Growth Management Planning Council on the housing element of the countywide planning policies. And I'll get to what those are and why they're important. Starts with land use planning in Washington State is a nested series of activities. It's fairly complicated, but it starts with the State Growth Management Act. The Puget Sound Regional Council, which I currently chair this year, sets out the region-wide 4-county region, Pierce, Snohomish, King, and Kitsap, goals and policies, and the plan for the region. Then each county creates what's called countywide planning policies with the cities, and they need to be ratified by the cities. And then each city does its own comprehensive plan, and King County for the unincorporated part of the county, which includes a housing element. And then the cities and the county do zoning to implement their comprehensive plans. So it is a stepwise process thusly. And we are here at this white circle, the CPPs. They were due to be updated last year, and in fact, we did update them last year. These are the mandatory guidelines that cities and the counties use in preparing comprehensive plans. It frames up, the housing chapter frames up housing goals, metrics, land use policies, et cetera, that then everybody has to follow and comply with when they do their own comprehensive plan updates. As I said, it requires a collaboration between the counties and the cities to create these. And then there's a long approval process. Now, what you will typically see in countywide planning policies is job targets and housing targets. Each jurisdiction gets a number. You must accommodate X more housing units and X more jobs by the time frame that you're planning for. What they don't do and have never done is say, how much did the jobs pay? How much did the homes cost? And do these things bear any relationship to one another? And that's what we're trying to get to now. So our last round at updating these was 10 years ago, 2012. And you can see here, this is what the King County countywide planning policies said on this topic of affordability. It set countywide needs and a percentage of the housing supply countywide based on these different bands of the area median income. So what that doesn't do is it doesn't say how much of that goes in Bellevue, in my city, or Redmond, or what are the needs in Auburn versus Tukwila. It doesn't sort of break it out in any meaningful way. And the truism, if everybody's responsible for something, nobody's responsible for something, applies right here. Because there was no way other than just the county monitoring macro statistics around the housing supply to see if we were making any progress. And I want to say a ton of work went into adopting this policy. And it was very well intended, but as you see, doesn't really have a lever for implementation. Fast forward to last year, and we have this game changer in House Bill 1220. It was adopted last year. It amends the GMA to require that local governments plan and accommodate for housing at all income levels. It also speaks to what they call special housing, which is homeless shelters and et cetera. And it significantly strengthens what the previous goal was, that we should encourage affordable housing. Now we must plan and accommodate for it. The Department of Commerce was given a mission to determine countywide levels of need and provide some guidance on how to distribute that need, and we're going to hear about that in a moment. But we are working to update our CPPs, which I said were due last year, and we did update them. But when we went to the Growth Management Planning Council, which we advised, they said, you know, this isn't quite good enough. Some of our city representatives on that body objected and said, you know, you don't really have affordability targets here, and we're not giving everybody a fair share. And to their credit, they weren't saying you're asking me for too much. They were saying you're not asking everybody for enough. So that was actually really exciting to have the GMPC say, do more, do better. So we are now going back and updating our plans to incorporate this planning for affordability. And I'm gonna keep going. So here's where we are. We are going to end up at the end of the day with affordable housing targets, hopefully by jurisdiction, and an accountability framework that says how we are going to check ourselves throughout the planning process and after the plans are done, importantly, after the plans are done, to see if we are meeting our goals, and if not, to sort of engage in continuous improvement and adjust. We are here at the accountability framework. We're starting at the end, but that's what we're able to do right now. I am not going to try to get you to take on board this whole slide because it's a lot, but these were the options that we looked at recently at our Affordable Housing Committee for that accountability framework. And there was a lot of great discussion. I have to give so much credit to some of the representatives from our cities, because this is asking cities to step up and say, I'm going to put a rule on myself that I have to live to. That is not an easy thing to do when you are an elected official. It binds your hands and it drives you towards decisions that you know may be tough. But we had a lot of really great participation from our cities at our last meeting. They showed a lot of interest in plan review, monitoring and reporting, and then monitoring after we have the plans in place. So I am confident we will get to a final decision on these that has some serious and really respectable accountability options. So next step, we have to complete our work on these targets for affordability. We need some numbers from Commerce, which they are diligently working on and really collaborating with our folks on. And we need to figure out how we distribute those countywide targets to all the 39 cities and unincorporated parts of King County. And then how are we going to hold ourselves accountable for planning our land use plans and our policies to meet those targets. And that work goes into our countywide planning policies, has to be done by the end of 2022, approved by the GMPC, the county council, ratified by cities, and then included in current updates to comprehensive plans. So Now, with all that, I'm just going to close by briefly saying where I started, comprehensive planning, not so sexy, not the sort of thing that actually gets people up out of bed in the morning saying, we're doing something great today. But if we get this right, for the first time, we are going to have accountable, localized goals for affordability of our housing units. And when I live in a place where you need $1 million to own a home, or your rent can go up from $2,600 a month to $3,200 a month overnight, this makes a difference. It makes a big difference between us being an exclusive community or merely an expensive community. And I just want to really just give a pitch to you all who are here today. We need you to get this work done and get it done well. I see that there are people who work in planning departments on here. We need you to help our communities and elected representatives understand the importance of this work and have the confidence that it is necessary and possible to do it. And for everybody who's outside of the city planning sector, we need you to help your neighbors and all of us elected officials to know that there is support for this work, because it's a commitment we're being asked to make. And commitments are scary, and we need to be committed and persistent. But I know that we can make an awful lot of progress this year if we get this right. So thank you for listening to me speak for a little while. And now I get to hand it off to Laura Hodgson of the Washington State Department of Commerce. And I'm sorry, but I don't have an intro for you, but I know you're doing really, really great work on this House Bill 1220 stuff. So I appreciate you, even though I don't have your whole background here in front of me, Laura.
All right. Well, thank you for having me here today. Can you see my screen and hear me? Yes. Okay. Excellent. Apologies. My cat is, the glories of working from home. Cat is wanting to sit on my lap. So I am here today to share about House Bill 1220 and the new housing element requirements, the work that Commerce is doing to project those housing needs that Claudia talked about, and developing guidance for the communities as they update their housing elements with this next periodic cycle, and resources from Commerce, including periodic update funding, tools, and middle housing funding that the legislature appropriated this year. So diving in, HB 1220 significantly updated the requirements for housing planning within Washington. Communities are now to plan for and accommodate, not just encourage, housing affordable to all economic segments. The Growth Management Act framework provides that counties choose a 20-year population target from a range they get from the state and suballocate among cities according to available land, water, and sewer capacity, among other things, with a limited amount of population being allocated to rural areas. In late 2022, or as early as possible, Commerce expects to provide countywide projections of housing need to for each economic segment, along with special housing needs as required by HB 1220. And special housing needs we are defining as permanent supportive housing, emergency housing, and emergency shelters. Commerce will also be providing recommendations for how to allocate these housing needs to cities, with recommendations for the types of housing that each city should be planning for to accommodate each economic group or income band. And to do this allocation, we're currently working on developing a tool that will help counties and cities to divide those numbers up. Commerce expects that counties will then work with the cities to allocate these countywide projections in the same way that they do population projections. And we understand that the requirements for the local housing element were also updated to put more focus on moderate density housing options in urban growth areas. They require housing elements to document barriers to housing availability, such as gaps in local funding and development regulations. And they also ask jurisdictions to look at the proximity of housing in relation to job centers, because we know that that is a driver in how long people commute and quality of life and environment and a multitude of other factors. In addition to these requirements to project housing needs and update some of the policies within the housing element, HB 1220 added additional requirements to the housing element that to address disparate impacts, displacement, and exclusion in housing. So Commerce will be providing guidance to help jurisdiction identify the types of policies and regulations that might result in racially disparate impacts, displacement, and exclusion in housing. The guidance will help communities identify areas where zoning may have had discriminatory effects, as well as areas where a lack of infrastructure investment may have had a disparate impact, and areas where the impacts of infrastructure investments may displace vulnerable populations. This guidance will also provide examples of policies so jurisdictions can begin to undo racially disparate impacts, displacement, and exclusion. After Commerce develops the housing needs and HB 1220 guidance, what will cities and counties need to do? As I previously mentioned, cities and counties will need to agree on an allocation of countywide projected housing needs by income level. The income level groups that we'll be breaking down the housing needs at are identified on the right-hand side of the screen. And Commerce will be providing a framework for allocating those needs consistent with a process that is used for population targets. Again, I mentioned the tool that we're currently developing and getting feedback on now. Local governments will then need to make assumptions about the zoning needed for each housing need and review infrastructure and existing zoning for how well it meets these needs. We understand that this probably will mean that jurisdictions will have to accommodate more higher density housing options that typically provide more affordability in the different income segments and housing needs that communities are going to see coming out of these numbers. Many communities will also be required to document programs and actions needed to achieve the housing availability, including gaps in local funding, barriers such as development regulations and other limitations. This is the new requirement, so we'll be providing guidance on it coming this fall on how to go about doing that review and what results you might find from your review of your policies and regulations. We also expect that the review of these gaps in infrastructure and fee structures and regulations will point to other revisions of programs that will need to be revised, including programs, fee structures, permitting processes, and potentially incentives that will help each community accommodate these housing needs. Commerce is also working with a second advisory committee to develop guidance to address the racially disparate impacts portion of HB 1220. This guidance will be available in August for public review, and we're working on how to make sure that we're integrally involving the anti-displacement work that is a portion of the second half of 1220 with the allocating of housing needs that's in the first part of 1220. We had to break it apart in terms of developing the work to complete it in time, but we're working on how they interact. To address this portion of the work, cities and counties will need to review their land use policies and regulations to see if they've contributed to or demonstrated disparate impacts, identify areas that are higher risk of displacement, and then for both of these steps, Commerce will be coming up with guidance or methodologies for how communities can do this work. HB 1220 then tells jurisdictions that they need to identify and implement policies and regulations that will begin to undo these impacts, including adopting anti-displacement policies. So timeline for the work, we're currently working on our methodology for allocating or disaggregating the projected housing needs. That guidance will come out in June, followed by our methodology for projecting countywide housing needs. And that if that seems backwards, normally you would do that the other way around, but we've heard from communities to do the disaggregating or allocation portion first. Following that, we'll have our racially disparate impacts work coming out in August through October, followed by our guidance for updating your housing element, those other items in sections B through D, and then our projected housing needs coming out as soon as we can get data from OFM, which is also delayed due to the census numbers from the pandemic. The new requirements for the housing element will need to be incorporated in the next periodic update of comprehensive plans. These updates are starting now for the jurisdictions in the Puget Sound region that are required to update by December of 2024. The legislature recognized that these requirements will take additional resources, and they've allocated periodic update funding this biennium with the expectation to do some of the funding in the upcoming years for the other periodic updates. We expect to start working on local government grants for these funds immediately after the budget is signed to get contracts out the door by the end of June. And there'll be more details about funding availability coming in the May Planners Update newsletter that comes out in a week or two. Note that the periodic updates include review and revisions of the comprehensive plan and development regulations. So what is required in the periodic update? We've mentioned it a few times. So from Commerce's perspective, we understand that a community must review the comprehensive plan for changes to state law, population projections, infrastructure investments, and changes in local priorities. This review will help the jurisdiction get a sense of the scope of the update. They also need to review the regulations for changes to state law and implementation priorities. Usually the combination of doing a comprehensive plan and development regulations update is a minimum of a 2-year process, with 1 year being out focusing on the comprehensive plan and 1 year on the development regulations, although the comprehensive plan typically spills into more than 1 year, I think. With this new timeline, Commerce recommends dockets of updates to the comprehensive plan for the 2022 year and 2023 year for the development regulations, or as soon as you can get it implemented to be completed by 2024. As public participation is a cornerstone in the Growth Management Act, the next step is to prepare a public participation plan, paying special attention to those that are impacted by decisions. It's important to be aware as communities do this work that those who attend standard public meetings tend to be those who are most housing secure. And for this significant housing work, you're going to want to reach out to housing providers for how to accommodate housing needs for the lowest income levels and those with lived experience, especially considering how your plan will be make more equitable infrastructure investments. A community would want to put together a web page with the update with clearly identified opportunities to engage in the process and an email text list for those wanting to engage. On the left-hand side here is an abbreviated list of what a community planner might do. On the right is how a community member might see opportunities to engage in the process. The challenge is to work with the community to educate about and follow new requirements in state law and build support for bold policies, consider innovative housing programs, and carefully considered infrastructure investments and regulatory changes. As communities do this work, remember that it takes a coalition to support housing, and that housing is broad. It impacts climate, fiscal responsibilities, affordability, environment, and that good housing policy supports all of these goals. So you've seen this graphic before, so I'm going to kind of breeze through it, but as communities work through their local plans and regulations, they're working with a housing policy framework. The local policy must be consistent with the state policy framework and state laws. However, local policies can be stronger or softer according to the local choice, but must be consistent with the overall framework. Thankfully, in Psrc regions, HB 1220 is consistent with Vision 2050. So if you're working to implement 2050, you are also, by way of doing so, implementing 1220 in many ways. And I don't want to repeat what was said, so I'm going to keep moving on here. The timeline for completion of periodic updates for the Psrgc jurisdictions was changed from June 30th, 2024 to December 31st, 2024 with HB 1241 this year, giving the Psrc jurisdictions an extra 6 months. Checklists and other resources for the periodic update will be available starting in June, as well as a Psrc workshop on comprehensive plan updates on June 15th. To receive formula grant funding from Commerce, we are requiring that jurisdictions complete a checklist for updating your plans and regulations, and more details on that will be available in May or the beginning of June. With all of these new requirements, you're probably wondering how do we get through all of this work? There's a lot of new things coming our way. More on that in a minute, but also a reminder that all jurisdictions have a technical assistance person assigned to them within the Growth Management Services team. And to find your assigned planner, you can go to the Growth Management Services webpage and click on the first link, which is the Growth Management Staff Contact Information Regional Assistance Map that's shown here on the right. As well as know that our housing team is also available to provide technical assistance along the way and support letters if you are working through a particularly difficult topic area. In addition to the periodic update funding, $7.5 million was appropriated for middle housing grants for the Psrc jurisdictions. Middle housing grantees will need to work towards adopting middle housing on at least 30% of lots zoned as single family residential or low density residential. And this funding can support a variety of activities a community may take to do this work. We will not be requiring adoption with this because it's such a short time frame, but we'll be asking for draft regulation updates that will meet the intent of this 30% requirement. Grantees will also need to include a racial equity analysis per the proviso. This includes the racially disparate impacts and anti-displacement work requirements of the housing element. So if a community were to be doing this work, and then also obviously receiving the comprehensive plan update funding, then they could spend the middle housing funding on the anti-displacement and racially disparate impacts work and use the remainder of the comprehensive plan funding for the other 1220 and other comprehensive plan update work that is needed this periodic update round. Formula grants will go to all cities who apply. We should have funding for all cities who apply in the Psrc region, and that funds of up to $100,000 are available depending on the size of your city. We plan to post this application today or tomorrow, so keep your eye out on our grants webpage, which you can access straight from the grant, the GMS housing webpage on the right-hand side. So with all these new requirements, as I mentioned, there's a lot of things coming at you. We want to let you know we do have some resources that are currently available. We have guidance on looking and evaluating your housing needs, and also our housing action plan guidance has a lot of resources for considering updates to plans, including a broad variety of housing strategies that will help to meet your housing needs. We have also on our website recorded a housing short course that will be updated in the next month or two to reflect the new requirements of House Bill 1220. And we'll also be updating our guidance this fall and recording a series of webinars on housing, a variety of housing topics that are with the aim of helping local planners and community members understand what the housing dynamics are, how to best plan for them, what the housing needs are, and how to make steps forward towards meaningful progress. And if you have any specific requests in terms of messaging or topic areas of webinars that you would like to see us produce over the summer as communities prepare to engage in this work, please let us know. We're currently working on a communications plan for that. And the last item, the projection of housing needs, that will be coming out. The final projections will be coming out late 2022 or as soon as we can with the OFM numbers, with the understanding that we will be hopefully providing that tool and the guidance earlier on so jurisdictions can start that work and then just fine tune their numbers when the OFM projections come out. And with that, I will just direct you to our housing webpage. If you go to Growth Management Services on Commerce's webpage, on the right-hand side, there's a button to look for housing. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or we can wait for those at the end when there's the housing time, the questions time. So thank you very much.
Great, and I think I'm next. Oh, take it from here.
I forgot the introduction to Laura. I had it up on my screen. And next, we have the wonderful Laura Benjamin. She is a senior planner with the Puget Sound Regional Council, the metropolitan planning organization that develops policies and coordinates decisions about regional growth, transportation, and economic development planning within Pierce, King, Snohomish, and Kitsap counties. Laura's work addresses regional growth management and land use policy, housing and housing affordability, equitable transit-oriented development, and implementation through local plans. Today, Laura is going to walk us through Vision 2050, which I mentioned in my plan and we're excited to hear about, which is our region's plan for growth. Vision 2050 serves as a guide for sustaining a healthy environment, thriving communities, and a strong economy. And Psrc's plan review process is instrumental to making that vision a reality. So thank you, Laura. And with that, I'll transition to her.
Thank you, Laura. So I am also Laura Benjamin. Give me just a moment to share my screen. All right, hopefully folks can see that. So thrilled to be here today. We are going to be talking about the Puget Sound Regional Council's plan review and certification process and some upcoming resources to support local jurisdictions as they think about housing and housing affordability as part of the local comprehensive plan update. So really quickly, we will talk about Vision 2050, something Councilmember Prince mentioned in his remarks. It's our region's long-range plan for growth. And then we'll talk about how that relates to local comprehensive plan updates and Psrc's plan review process. Really quickly, I just wanted to clarify, we're going to talk about the region a lot during this presentation. So what we mean by that, it is the counties of King, Pierce, Snohomish, and Kitsap. It is home to over 4 million people. 82 cities and towns from the very urban to the very rural. So lots of different places covering this 4-county region. This is the third time you've seen this slide in a slightly different format. So I feel like if there's anything folks take home, it is the kind of statewide planning framework we have here in Washington. But just really wanted to clarify where Psrc fits into all of this. So you can see here, Psrc are the regional planning organization with Vision 2050 and the multi-county planning policies. And that work kind of trickles down to the countywide work that Councilmember Balducci talked about in terms of both countywide policies and growth targets. And then the local jurisdictions use that information at the countywide level, as well as the state and the regional level, to update their comprehensive plans. And with all that, Psrc certifies countywide planning policies and local comprehensive plans, which we'll talk about in detail in just a minute. A little bit more about Psrc and what we do in terms of regional policy. So we have Vision 2050, our region's long-range plan for growth. It includes multi-county planning policies, or MPPs, we often refer to them as well as the regional growth strategy, which is a strategy for where and how to accommodate growth over the next 3 decades. And this all filters down into more detailed functional plans like our regional transportation plan. The next plan for 2022 is actually going to our General Assembly for adoption later this month, as well as a regional economic strategy that we update every few years. So why all this planning? Why are we looking out to the year 2050? And it really comes down to growth. So our region is growing now, and we forecast that we are going to continue to grow over the next several decades. So we are expecting over 1.5 million more people over the next 3 decades, and over 1 million new jobs. So lots of folks here, lots of jobs now, and we need to be thinking about where and how to accommodate housing units and people to live in them and jobs in the coming years. Also, something that's kind of unique to the time we're in right now is that we are experiencing historic investment and planning and construction of high capacity transit. So really thinking about, we have this growth now, we see more coming in the future, how can we leverage the region's investments? So you can see on the screen, this lists just a few that, recently and in coming years, we have several light rail stations and BRT lines coming online. And we're going to see even more with the expansion of ferries and freeways and BRT. So really thinking about how we can think about growth now and in the future, and how these connect to these transit and transportation investments. So with all that, we have Vision 2050, which is our region's long-range plan for growth. As Councilmember Prince, our Growth Management Policy Board Chair, mentioned, it was adopted in October of 2020, and it's really kind of setting the stage for how we as a region want to grow in a way that is sustainable for the environment and promotes a healthy economy for all people, and also looks at all of this through a racial equity lens. So quickly getting into Vision 2050, for folks who are familiar with the local comprehensive plan, it reads somewhat similarly, and that there's goals and policies and actions. Something that is unique to Vision 2050 is the regional growth strategy, which we'll talk about more in just a moment, but it's really a numeric strategy about where and how to plan for new growth. And then we have policy sections ranging from regional collaboration, knowing that these challenges and solutions cross jurisdictional boundaries, to climate change, to economy, to public services, so ranging quite a bit. Key policy themes, one of the reasons we're here today, looking at how we can increase housing choices and affordability, how we can provide opportunities for all people, thinking about how we can keep the region moving and how we can give people choices beyond driving alone, and also how we can act collaboratively and support local efforts, knowing that many of the solutions as we move forward are going to require partners and some economy of scale. So because it's Affordable Housing Week, we'll touch a little bit more on housing in Vision 2050. 3 key themes on the housing multi-county planning policies in Vision 2050. First is that there are housing access and affordability issues in all of our communities. They may look different, but all communities are struggling with these challenges, so that really housing is a regional issue. It's not just a Seattle problem, it's not just a big city issue, but that we see housing access and affordability challenges everywhere. The next is that we need to think of housing not in a vacuum, that we need to think about housing in relation to transit access and service, to jobs, and to other services and amenities. So where housing is located and who has access to that housing is really important. And then finally, really that we need to expand affordable housing types and choices. We have a lot of detached single family homes in our region. It's an important type of housing. It serves the needs of some households, but we need to have other types of housing that's at different price points and different shapes and sizes to meet the needs of people in all stages of life. A little bit more about our regional housing work. This diagram really just tries to kind of visually show the relationship between Vision 2050 and what we have next is our regional housing strategy that PSRC's executive board adopted back in February of this year. It's meant to be a coordinated playbook of strategies for us to better address housing access and affordability in the coming years. And then this all helps to inform local housing work, from the housing needs assessments and updates to housing elements in local comprehensive plans, to work with housing actions and other local regulations. So really quickly, what's the difference between Vision 2040, that was the old plan, and our current plan, Vision 2050? Obviously expanding the planning horizon 10 years out to 2050 so that we have that coverage for the 2044 new planning horizon for local comprehensive plans, really factoring in transit, thinking about better ways to recognize Native tribes and military installations, groups that are really important, and sovereign governments, planning outside of the Growth Management Act framework, and a new chapter on climate change. So now getting to centers and TOD, or transit-oriented development. So this ties really closely with the regional growth strategy, which is the numeric guidance for how to and where to accommodate growth over the next 3 decades. So Vision 2050 has a goal of accommodating 65% of population growth and 75% of employment growth in regional growth centers, which you can see on the map on the left, and in high capacity transit station areas, which you can see on the map on the right. So really thinking about trying to have the lion's share of new population and employment growth be in places that have the infrastructure now and or are planning to accommodate and have the infrastructure for this growth in the future. Also wanted to emphasize that Vision 2050 is not planning just for the sake of planning, that really these multi-county planning policies and the regional growth strategy are tied to, taking concrete steps and trying to reach some of our regional goals around climate change, racial equity, and other things. So some examples here, we see if we model out what could happen with the policies in Vision 2050, it helps to preserve rural and resource lands. We see greater transit ridership and ways that we can combat climate change. So now shifting from Vision 2050 specifically to comprehensive plan updates. So you can see there's this timeline here. We adopted Vision 2050 in that kind of dark purple box back in 2020. Now we are working to implement Vision 2050. And a key part of that is this green bar here, which is the countywide planning policies that Councilmember Balducci mentioned earlier, and the local comprehensive plan updates. So to help with this, PSRC developed a plan review manual. It's something that was spelled out for PSRC to do as part of Vision 2050. And the plan review manual is really meant to help the user to understand both the expectations and the process for plan review and certification. So as PSRC staff review a comprehensive plan, and PSRC's executive board makes the final decision on plan certification, city staff and other stakeholders are aware of kind of what the expectations are and what the process is. The plan review manual is for local comprehensive plans, as well as other types of plan review, such as countywide planning policies, long-range transit plans, but really for all of them, it's providing legal framework, the policy context, what's set up in Vision 2050, what the process is for the local jurisdiction or agency, and then a consistency tool that we'll talk about in just a moment. So with the consistency tool, really what it's intended to do is walk the user through what are the requirements or recommendations in Vision 2050 that should be implemented through local comprehensive plans, to really set clear expectations And also we've heard from many local staff that these consistency tools are helpful when scoping for the plan update to kind of get a sense of, what are new topics that they need to be exploring? What are topics that maybe they touched on a bit in their current plan, but need to, dig deeper into as part of the update. So now getting into the process a little bit more. So when reviewing a plan for certification, the Puget Sound Regional Council is looking for kind of 3 buckets of things. So the first are aspects of the Growth Management Act that are transportation related requirements. So these tie to land use assumptions that are tied to travel demand. It gets a little wonky, but really it's making sure that those boxes are being checked that are required through the State Growth Management Act. The second box is then consistency with the Regional Transportation Plan. If you remember from an earlier slide, the Regional Transportation Plan is a functional plan that helps to implement Vision 2050. And that plan includes transportation lists, financing strategies, things like that. So making sure that the Regional Transportation Plan and the local plans are consistent in terms of transportation planning. And then finally, consistency with Vision 2050. So really trying to make sure that the multi-county planning policies, the policies in Vision, are being implemented through the local plans. So PSRC's executive board has the final decision-making process for plan certification, and PSRC's executive board is made up of elected officials from across the region. So there's 3 options: full certification, saying, plan checks the boxes and meets the requirements; conditional certification, saying most of the requirements are met, but there are a few things that need to be changed. And PSRC works with the jurisdiction to put together kind of like a timeline and a work plan for when conditions will be met and can be fully certified. And then not certified means that the plan is inconsistent with Vision 2050 and or the plan has not been submitted for review and certification during the timeline. And either conditional certification or full certification is required for a city to compete for federal transportation dollars, which is something that PSRC manages the competitive application for those dollars. All right, getting towards the end of the presentation, we just see a timeline here of things we're seeing both in the past and moving forward. So in 2021, counties and local jurisdictions were really focused on countywide planning policies and growth targets. And now in 2022 and moving forward, we're seeing more around really gearing up for that local comprehensive plan with plan scoping, doing outreach to community members, as well as the SEPA environmental review. We expect cities are really going to then dive into the plan and policy development in the coming years. And then, as Laura H. from Commerce mentioned, the plan deadline of the end of 2024. So we are anticipating at PSRC that majority of the plan certification decisions are going to be made in 2025, just assuming plans are completed in 2024 and then to review and go through that process that we'll see those decisions being made in 2025. So to support all of this work, PSRC has existing and forthcoming guidance and resources. Some new guidance around growth targets that counties and cities used as part of their growth target process. We have a new economic development element guide, which is exciting, and some new guidance on tribal coordination, as well as other work on things like TOD, housing, equitable engagement. You can see there's a URL there on the slide where you can access all this information. And then just really quickly, what is on board for PSRC staff. So last year, we were really focused on updating the plan review manual. There's a webinar that's dedicated to walking through the plan review manual that is on our website if folks would like to learn more about that. This year and next year, we are really focused on plan review, surveying jurisdictions to understand kind of what their needs are, where their interests are, where we can provide support as workshops, as Laura H. mentions, and I'll talk about in just a minute. And then in terms of ongoing, we are always looking to release new resources and data products that are helpful to jurisdictions, as well as hosting ongoing events. So really quickly first about this survey, PSRC fielded a survey to local jurisdiction staff to get a better understanding of what their plan and process was for updating their local comprehensive plans, where they felt like they needed more information or support. And we heard really clearly the kind of 4 key focus areas are housing, transportation, climate, and equity. And then also just really needing more information on what's changed between Vision 2040 and Vision 2050, and making sure that there's clear communication between local jurisdictions and Psrc. So to respond to that, we are developing an outreach program. We have our kickoff event on June 15th. I believe more information is going to be available on that soon. So the June 15th event is going to be kind of an overview kickoff session, and then we plan to host more topic-specific workshops over the summer and fall on a variety of topics. Other things we can do, Psrc staff are always available to meet one-on-one. We are happy to provide presentations or meet with councils, commissions, boards, etc. And then we have all the resources on our website that we're happy to walk through with staff and other stakeholders. So that is all I have. I will say Maggie Moore, whose contact info is listed here, she is our plan review lead. She couldn't be here today, so I'm happy to answer questions today, and Maggie is the person to follow up with in the future. So thank you, and I think I will hand it back to Patience.
Thank you, Laura. And what an amazing presentation, and thank you for the great work that you and your team at Psrc are doing. Many thanks to Laura H. for your presentation earlier on the work that the Department of Commerce is leading. And thanks to our regional leaders, Councilmember Balducci and Councilmember Ed Prince for joining us as well. So now we are at the Q&A session, and I am excited to be joined by Alex Brennan, who is a true partner in this work and is the executive director at FutureWise, who's going to be co-facilitating the Q&A session with me. Alex?
Hi, Patience. Oh. It's great to be here. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you well.
Wonderful. Yeah, I just want to add, it was really great to see the presentations. I think so much useful information from the state and from Psrc, and a big thanks to the leadership from Council Members Prince and Balducci too.
Absolutely. You know, Alex, there's a number of things that I'm really excited about, and I hope we can hone in on in this discussion and then take questions in the Q&A. Councilmember Balducci, to see King County begin to talk about targets is the place that we've worked towards for so long. And we are excited to get to a place where we have accountable local goals. And one question that I have for you is, I know you talked a little bit earlier about how planners can support you and support their own elected officials. And I wonder how advocates can also continue to be of support, housing providers in different regions, really helping move that work forward. If you could expound a little bit for some of the folks who were not here earlier, and then we'll go to the questions that we have in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. I love the question. So a lot of these recommendations are going to be made from places that are not as visible as your average city council meeting or county council meeting. They're happening at places like the Affordable Housing Committee. I put the membership link in the chat. They're going to happen at our Growth Management Planning Council. I will put the link to the membership of that body in the chat. So if you see an elected official on those bodies that is from your jurisdiction or somewhere near where you live, and you're an advocate, then letting those folks hear that what they're doing really matters and that people care and want to see us move towards having accountable affordable housing goals or targets, then that would be super helpful. So like I said, I'll put that in the chat, but on a secondary level, we all live in a city or unincorporated King County. Making sure that you turn up or occasionally contact the people who represent you and say, I support more housing. I support more affordable housing. We hear a lot from people who oppose more housing. And it's really helpful to hear from folks, because I think it's the majority of us really understand that having housing prices just continue to skyrocket because of lack of availability is not what makes for a healthy community or the kind of community we want to live in. I didn't talk that much about equity, but we know that these our housing pricing challenges fall the most heavily on communities of color, on older people, on younger people. The next generation of adults who are coming up have a very hard time affording to live here. So let people know, let us know that you care about those people and that we should too. The reason it's hard, by the way, is not just because local electeds have got the wrong ideas. It's because we by definition represent the people who live here now. We don't represent the people who don't live here yet. And so it's we're asking people to care about the future and future people who aren't going to tick a box for them in the next election. So necessarily, I mean, maybe they'll be here by then, but so it's doing the right thing. And we need to encourage our leaders to feel strengthened and encouraged to do the right thing, even if it can be difficult and there can be some folks who are not that happy about it. So ping us a lot. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Alex, you want to take the next question for folks here?
Yeah, well, we've got a string of kind of questions and some initial responses in the chat, but one thing I wanted to give a little bit more space to is a question about what this really means for zoning changes. Zoning is a really big part of comprehensive planning and development regulations, but I think sometimes we talk about these new requirements that can feel really abstract. And it's, I'm wondering, and I think maybe Laura Hodgson could kind of take the initial response to this to explain a little bit more kind of what this might mean for zoning changes that cities might consider.
So with regard to the zoning changes that cities might consider, and I realize there's some other comments in the chat, so we'll get to this in a second. We're still developing our guidance, but what our initial thought is that it's going to require more dense development around areas of opportunity. So to address the exclusion in housing. So, allowing for sufficient amount of multifamily housing, but also allowing for other types of housing options that are more affordable. So middle housing is one that you hear a lot in the news. And while that is definitely going to be more affordable, typically those duplex, triplex, townhouse scale types of developments. I think one of the things that we're also going to need to start looking at is other unique housing opportunities that accommodate housing needs of the medium and low income housing segment. So do maybe not manufactured home parks, but small lot development. That's one thing. Community land trusts, that's going to be talks to the affordable housing ownership comment that was in here before. That's one of the a great option for home ownership and potentially doing a lower income housing opportunities. And just what are those unique types of housing solutions that maybe are not very common. I know tiny homes are not authorized exclusively, but in manufactured homeworks, they could be a solution. So we're going to start developing the suite of solutions that are available at those different income brackets. And what's going to be where the work I think is going to come in for the local government is looking at your own unique situation. Because we can say, a townhouse or duplex might be 50 to 80% AMI in this jurisdiction, but in another jurisdiction, it may be something different. So you're going to have to look at on the ground local conditions, but we're going to be providing guidance about those suite of options at the different levels. And if you have any housing developers here who have knowledge about how to provide the housing at those lowest income segments, we're really going to try to be focusing on those because that's going to be the hardest need to meet.
Absolutely. And to have the Growth Management Act housing goal be changed by House Bill 1220 was definitely a game changer. And I hope that our community recognizes that where we're now planning for and accommodating housing and not just as encouraging, but really taking the responsibility. So I have a follow-up question for you, Laura, on some of the guidance and support that you will support communities with, and that's Laura H. You referenced in your presentation that you will be providing guidance on some fee structures, some regulations, support. What will that look like? Is that going to be really unpacking specific policies? And can you touch a little bit about the staff support that you referenced could come with that for local jurisdictions?
So what we'll probably be developing is, well, first of all, I would note that we do have a variety of housing strategies in our housing action plan guidance, and that guidance has a great resource. It talks about where certain housing tools are most effective, tips for implementing them, potential hurdles, the amount of resources you need to implement them. So that is a basis point. We'll also be looking at, so further developing that for the types of housing that may not have been covered in that guidance. And some of those unique fee structure things. So one of the things that we've been seeing with our CHIP grant is that the adoption of system development charge waivers and impact fee waivers are very important for developing affordable housing and are keys to getting that on the ground from a developer perspective. So some of those types of things that we hear from developers, affordable housing developers, and those that we know from a policy perspective are more effective. So system development charge waivers, incentives, so density bonuses, maybe not inclusionary zoning because that's a market thing, but the suite of strategies will be developing specific guidance on where they can be applicable and how to do them. Did that answer your question?
That answers my question, but leaving out inclusionary zoning.
I don't think we'll leave it out. I think that what is important to consider when you do inclusionary zoning is that understanding its market impacts. Yes. So you can't just do inclusionary zoning without understanding its impacts on the market. So because it needs to be specifically tailored for the market in which it needs to be developed, because it has market implications. So I'm all for inclusionary zoning. I love it. It was actually the first thing I was surprised about when I moved to Washington, that there wasn't inclusionary zoning out here, but it has to be carefully done in the context of the environment. So
absolutely. Yeah, I wonder if there could be some long-term coordination between the Department of Commerce and Psrgc in thinking of some kind of overarching framework, and then the Nexus impact analysis can then further build on a set framework. Happy to coordinate with all of you in thinking of that. Alex, I think this is a good time for us to pivot to some of the questions in the Q&A, and some of them really start off with Laura's presentation and asking about the local jurisdictions and how their plans are certified. So over to you.
Yeah, so, I think there's a couple of related questions about certification, about how, and I think this maybe gets to also the question about kind of how is the housing element of your comprehensive plan different from a housing action plan or another type of non-binding housing plan that your city or county might have already adopted.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say, and I think that this is both, so yeah, a clarification on kind of the state's role and how the state's role or lack of role in certifying or approving plans, and then also for Laura Benjamin on Psrc's role and kind of how the certification around transportation issues, which is, and the multi-county planning policies, which is Psrc's primary focus, how that ties into housing issues. But Laura Hodgson, we can start with you.
So with regard to this is specifically in regard to Patrice's question, is that correct, Alex?
I think Patrice's question, and then the question about certification.
Okay. So with regard to Patrice's question, it's my understanding that those plans or regulations that are adopted by ordinance are law. So your housing element, your development regulations, those that are adopted by resolution are a commitment from your jurisdiction. So typically we see housing action plans adopted by resolution. So it's a commitment for your jurisdiction. It's not binding law. And plans are the guiding policy, and then development regulations are the implementation tools. So I think it depends on the way they're adopted and the structure of the plan. And typically those are the three kind of buckets that you'll see things in is housing policy, like a housing element, development regulations, and then housing plans. And then on to the second comment with regard to certification, for commerce, plans are considered valid upon adoption, and we don't certify plans at commerce. That's the growth management framework. And then if there is any concerns with plans, somebody who has standing, which means someone who has participated in the process, provided comments, may then appeal within 60 days of the adoption to the Growth Management Hearings Board, at which case then they review to see if there are any inconsistencies with the laws and regulations provided in the revised Code of Washington, the RCW, or in the guidance that's implemented through the Washington the WAC, Washington Advisory Code, and then from there make a finding if it needs to be revised. So that's the framework from the state side.
And Laura Benjamin, can you speak a little bit to kind of how PSRC engages in certification and how that process works?
Yeah, so state law requires the Puget Sound Regional Council to review and certify not only local comprehensive plans, but also the countywide planning policies, some other functional plans for designated regional growth centers and manufacturing industrial centers, and then also Sound Transit's long range plans. But so specifically talking about local comprehensive plans here, most of our review and certification is focused around the major periodic updates. Cities can update their plans annually. Often those updates are so minor or small that it doesn't trigger this regional certification and review. So it's really this kind of 8 or now 10-year review and certification process. And it's really looking for consistency with Vision 2050, specifically the transportation related elements, as well as making sure that the requirements of the provisions in the Growth Management Act or state law are included in the plan as well. So it's really making sure that those boxes are checked in terms of planning around transportation demand modeling, making sure that land use assumptions are consistent between the various elements of the plan, making sure that, if there's capacity increasing transportation plans in a local plan, that they're also in the regional transportation plan. So all these different plans and processes are speaking to one another. So PSRC reviews the plans both in the draft and in the final adopted stage. Staff make a recommendation to our policy boards. It starts at the Growth Management Policy Board, then works its way to the Transportation Policy Board, and then final decision is with PSRC's Executive Board. And then from there, plans that are fully or conditionally certified are eligible to compete for federal transportation dollars from highway and transit. It's wonky. If folks want to get into the legalese of all of it, I'm happy to talk offline.
It's definitely wonky. Thank you, Laura, though, for really providing a simplified answer to that. I want to bring in Councilmember Balducci in this conversation in talking about the affordable housing targets, what you're doing as the Affordable Housing Committee. You have a commitment to have staff capacity that can coordinate with local jurisdictions to review plans and really support their process. If you can talk a little bit more what your vision for that work is.
Yeah, so first of all, we're just to finish the development part of the work and then get to the implementation question that you asked. We are working hand in glove with the commerce work, where we will ultimately get a countywide measures of need and a recommended methodology to disperse that need. And then we have talked about things like where can we have additional resources for advisory consulting type work for cities to implement the things they need to in both their comprehensive plans and in their land use codes going forward. Who will be responsible for plan review? We haven't decided that yet, but we've talked about different models of who will be responsible for plan review. And then where do we get the resources for those people to be available to do the plan reviews and guidance and such? So it's really being developed. I will say that there's a couple of models that exist already. there's the model of, we didn't used to have the robust kind of housing group that we currently have at King County. That was built after as a part of the Regional Affordable Housing Task Force work, which I referred to very early on in this meeting, but that was back in the 2017 era. And so now we've got more people than we used to have, but as you can imagine, they're quite busy. And so we might need more staffing there. And then we've got these sub-regional coordinating bodies around affordability. Mine on the east side is a Regional Coalition for Housing, or ARCH. There's SCIP in the south end. Could those be a place where, with some assistance, you might have planners or code writing type folks who could help with this work? That is all being developed right now, where the resources go. And saying this made me think of something that I immediately forgot. What was I going to say? It's gone. It'll come back. I'll just jump in at some random point with the thought that I had that escaped me. Sorry.
Well, thank you. That's helpful context. I appreciate it. I want to continue in this conversation, Laura Benjamin, on expanding housing types and choices that you mentioned in your presentation. And there's a question from Ryan Donahue, who I know chairs a coalition in East King County, an East Side Affordable Housing Coalition. And he's asking the question around one thing that we talk a lot about is changing zoning. We need to technically get to a place where we do allow those dense housing types. And he's wondering how the comprehensive plan process, from your perspective, can really get us to a place where, beyond what's adopted in their plan, we can have regulations that make it practical. What are some of the technical tools that Psrc is providing further to support jurisdictions in passing those regulations?
That's a great question. I think this kind of circles back a little bit to what Laura H. was saying around development regulations. So just to kind of reinforce, the comprehensive plan is meant to be this kind of visionary, aspirational document about where a community wants to see itself over the next 20 years. There's also some functional stuff of like, how do we make sure people have clean drinking water and things like that. But a lot of it is, you know, what do we as a city, community, whatever the kind of geographic area is, want to be for our residents and our businesses in the coming decades. And while that's really exciting, I know for some people also, because it is kind of at that higher level and aspirational, it can kind of leave people wanting more or something more concrete. So then that's where these development regulations come in. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. So a lot of it is making sure that comprehensive plan policies, future land use maps, things like that, are structured in a way that it creates those openings and those opportunities for local staff and planning commissions and councils to then develop the ordinances and the code and the whatnot to actually take these kind of more aspirational, visionary thoughts into practice, into like what could actually get built in your neighborhood. So Psrc, we are currently updating our housing element guide to provide some policy support for local jurisdictions as they update their housing element. I will also shout out Commerce has a new updated housing element guide that is fantastic. It has made our life a lot easier in terms of what we have to update because they did most of the work. And then also Psrc has what we call our HIP, or our housing innovation program. I can put a link in the chat after this. And this is really, it's 49 more concrete tools and actions local jurisdictions can take to promote the development of housing overall, and also more specifically, housing affordable to 0 to 80% AMI. So trying to provide more technical assistance. We also have some illustration work and some cost analysis work in the pipeline that we hope to share soon. We have also heard from many stakeholders for interest in model code, model ordinances around housing. And that is something we will definitely be looking into as we get farther through the comp plan update.
Well, thank you for that, Laura. Just tagging along as I hand over back to Alex. Laura H., you talked a little bit earlier about the middle housing grants, and I see that as another incentive and tool that can really help jurisdictions be thinking more proactively. Can you talk about the uptake that you've seen from cities and how here at the local level we can really encourage local jurisdictions to take up that opportunity?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. So we have not yet put out our middle housing grants. We're actually planning to post them today. So I can't tell you about the uptick in the grants, but I can tell you based on our work on housing action plans and code updates in the last biennium through the HB 1923 grant program that almost every jurisdiction was looking at middle housing updates as a tool to help get more housing on the ground and more affordable housing. So it's one thing, it's also something that we realize needs a lot of focus from communities as they try to evaluate those places that are going to be the best fit for that middle housing. And we're hoping that they find the best fit in areas of opportunity and areas out, not right at station areas, but outside of station areas where they're transit adjacent and near services such as schools and employment centers, so that those middle housing opportunities are well connected. But as I mentioned, communities across the state are looking at that. And while they do that work of doing the policy review work and determining where those regulations need to be updated, they're going to be getting a lot of pushback. So it's really important for communities, both advocacy organizations and planners, to think about who in their community can help to advocate for these changes, because there are something that is, while the planners are all for, and they will probably recommend to their planning commissions and their elected officials are going to listen to those people who are at the meetings, and they may not be supportive of it. So we need advocates at those meetings to help push for these policies that we know are going to have an impact on housing in communities. So that would be great.
Patience, one other area of questions that I'm seeing is around racial equity, anti-displacement, and undoing exclusionary policies. And I think that's an aspect of the new HB 1220 requirements we haven't talked as much about. And so I'm wondering from all the folks we've heard today, if there is information that you'd like to add on kind of how we're incorporating some of those priorities into guidance and into the support for local jurisdictions.
I guess I can kick things off. So when we surveyed local jurisdictions around their comprehensive plan update, one of the things we heard really clearly was the need for more data, technical assistance, information on best practices around mitigating displacement, both residential and commercial. And then I know with the language in House Bill 1220 that I'm sure Laura H. will speak to, and I also believe there's language in the King County countywide planning policies that also supports all this work as well. We heard that there was the need for more information. So we have developed a somewhat high-level guidance on ways to mitigate residential displacement. The new economic development element guide that we developed also touches on commercial displacement, and we have some forthcoming guidance as well. We're working with Psrc's newly formed Equity Advisory Committee to look at some equity impact tools and other ways that we can really factor in disparate burdens and benefits, both from the past and thinking about how that is a part of our current and future planning work. And then one last thing is we are updating the regional displacement risk mapping, which is some data analysis to look at places with potentially higher risk of residential displacement. So trying to get some updated information there.
And piggybacking on that, so as part of our HB 1220 work, we'll be actually looking at methodologies. How can we can walk communities through the process of looking at and evaluating, do they have policies and regulations in place that may have led to exclusion or displacement in their communities? We're currently working through several methodologies that have been used throughout the country to do that work, and working with our advisory committee on figuring out the process and the steps that are going to be most helpful for jurisdictions. And we're currently working with a group of planners who from throughout the state, representing a variety of size communities, so that we can make sure that the guidance is in tune to what will be useful for planners as they do this work. But I should say that as we do that, so it'll be looking at both the policies and regulations that have led to anti-displacement or displacement, exclusion, and racially impacts, as well as anti-displacement. And I would say that in the PSRC jurisdictions, you actually have a leg up in the displacement realm because you have the PSRC anti-displacement map and some of the guidance that is currently available. Their tool is actually might be more robust than what we are going to be doing from the statewide level, because you have access to a significant amount of more data and resources than a jurisdiction in a partially pending state or county may have, and which we are also developing the guidance for. So please look at that as one of your tools. And as you do that, in addition to PSRC's guidance, we do have some anti-displacement guidance in our, I believe it's our Housing Action Plan guidance, Chapter 5. And we also have a suite of anti-displacement strategies that we pulled from our Housing Action Plans, 7 pages of policies that jurisdictions used for anti-displacement as a starting point in advance of us developing our guidance this fall. So that's a little bit what's coming down the pipeline, but we're currently working on that. And if you know of any anti-displacement work that we should be looking at as we review these or exclusion work that we should be looking at as we are working through this with our advisory committee, please let us know, and we'll make sure to look at that and make sure that we're developing the best guidance possible.
Thank you, Laura. And sticking to this equity framing, there's another side of the work, which is equitable distribution of growth. And I want to pick up a question in the chat here from Doug at the Ebonist, and he asks a timely question where he says that some cities like Linwood, Mesa Island, and others seem headed towards ramping up restrictions rather than encouraging housing growth. Will any of the planning processes that have been discussed so far actually stop that? Or is this just going to cost them a little extra paperwork and maybe a few lost grant opportunities? I know this is rather a political question and may not be the best for the PSRC folks, but I'm glad we have Councilmember Balducci here. And Laura, both of you, feel free to come in with your responses.
I was going to say that's a great question for Alex and future-wise. I mean, we do all have to comply with the Growth Management Act. And if your planning and your activities put you out of compliance with your own plans, your countywide planning policies, or the Growth Management Act itself, there is a civil litigation path. I am going to be stumped if you ask me what all the remedies are, but there is definitely, an appeal to the Growth Management Hearings Board, appeal through the court system. You can get tied up in litigation if you don't do the right thing here. And let me just say that that question kind of included a little bit of yeah, you might lose some grants. Let me assure you, the cities care a lot about those grants. They care a lot about the grants that come through PSRC on the transportation side, for example. And so that is a place where I've been thinking about how can we beef up this system, really just getting started. What you're hearing here is the baby steps of a new thing. And the new thing is planning for affordability, planning for housing costs, not just numbers of housing units. And so on the transportation side, if your transportation element of your comprehensive plan does not comply or is not consistent with the regional plan and things, you're not going to pass consistency review at PSRC, and you'll be ineligible for grants, and that can be significant. I think we still have to work toward, okay, now we're doing this activity, we're planning for affordability. What if people just really don't comply? And I see that as an maybe evolutionary step as we go forward on this path, but I'm happy to hear from others if they have other information or thoughts that I'm not calling up. Also there's peer pressure. I'm sorry, can I just say, one of the things that I'm the most proud of that I didn't talk about much at the Affordable Housing Committee is we advocated for the staffing and the resources to create a regional affordable housing dashboard. It's online, it's pretty cool. It's got details about what's going on in each jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And so you can see what's happening and what's not happening. And we will continue to update that as part of the accountability framework that we're voluntarily agreeing to at the Growth Management Planning Council. But that will be a place for advocates to know, and the press and the public to know, who is doing what they said they were going to do and who isn't.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a great discussion, great presentation with so much in-depth information. Really appreciate all of the work that you do, Laura at Psrgc, Laura at the Department of Commerce, King County Councilmember Balducci, thank you once again. And thanks to Councilmember Prince. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We have a lot of work ahead of us. I think Laura said over 1.6 million people are going to be in our region over the next 30 years. And we need to plan for 65% of population growth to be near transit. And in order to do that, we need to change our zoning. We need to change our policies at the speed of growth that we continue to see in the region. And it's going to take all of us. It's all of you planners, it's all of you advocates. And I believe that we are in a region where if anyone can do this, it is us. So thank you for really being a part of this incredible work. And happy Affordable Housing Week.
That's right. Let's work on that chant. Hey, hey, ho, ho.